Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2022 Solutions for Congested Corridors Program Workshop. I am Naveen Habib. I will be your host and presenter for this afternoon's events. It's 1:01 right now. There are still people logging in, so we're going to give them a couple more minutes to keep rolling in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks, everyone. Hey, Kayla, do you see that comment from Lewis in the comment box?
Yeah, hi Naveen. I'm not sure what's going on with the attachment, so we can post that link into the chat because I'm not sure that everybody's available to see what Matthew sent.
And just FYI, that working draft is also online on our website on the SCCP webpage under workshops. For the March workshop, you can go and download it from there, and that should also, hopefully that should work for you.
And just a reminder to everyone too that we'll make sure afterwards that the PowerPoint is posted to the website too, so you'll have access afterwards also.
Thanks, Kayla. We're just going to give folks another minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started at 1:05. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2022 Solutions for Congested Corridors Program Workshop. You will hear us refer to the program interchangeably as program and SCCP through the course of this workshop. As a reminder, anytime we state we or us, we are referring to Commission staff. I am Naveen Habib. I manage this program, and I'm joined today by Matthew Yoscott, who is the Deputy Director of SB1 Programming, to cover today's workshop. We also have additional members of our team joining us today to help moderate this workshop. This includes Kayla Giese, Celesta Seves, and Cherry Zamora. In these workshops, we plan to review and amend program guidelines to prepare for the next program cycle, which is cycle 3. These guidelines govern how the program will be implemented, facilitated, and reported on, as well as how funds will be distributed to reimburse agencies for expenditures. And finally, as a reminder, all proposed changes or recommendations to the guidelines can be seen in bold yellow font on the corresponding slides that you will be seeing later today. Alrighty, so before we get started, I will share a quick refresher about the program, which was established in 2017's landmark legislation, Senate Bill 1. $250 million are appropriated annually from the state highway account to provide funding to regional transportation planning agencies, county transportation commissions, and Caltrans to reduce congestion throughout the state. The program is currently on its second cycle, covering fiscal years 2021-22 to 2022-23, with 7 projects programmed for $500 million in funding and total project costs valued at $2.6 billion. And with that, let's move on to some housekeeping items. Kayla, please walk us through the GoToWebinar logistics. Thank you.
Thanks, Naveen. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Our workshops normally take place in different locations around the state. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. The workshop agenda is located under the Handouts tab and can be downloaded and saved during the webinar. It can also be found on the Commission's website. For participants joining us through GoToWebinar, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio, question, and handout tabs. Under the audio tab, you have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. If you prefer computer audio, please select the appropriate box. If you prefer the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. We welcome comments and questions from attendees as a part of each topic at this workshop. There will also be an opportunity for comments and questions at the end of the presentation. There are 2 options for participants to provide comments. You may click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Also, use the raise hand feature as early into the topic as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. If you raise your hand to speak, please do not lower your hand until you are done making your comment. This helps us ensure you can be unmuted properly. You may also use the questions tab to submit a question or comment. Please type in the topic you are commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. You will not be able to be on camera while making comments. Back to you, Naveen.
Thank you, Kayla. If you have joined us previously, you may be aware that agendas are posted up to 10 calendar days in advance of each workshop. Presentations and recordings are posted after each workshop, and we will email any key decisions made during a workshop to all attendees following that workshop. We will make recommendations based on the consensus reached throughout roughly 2 workshops. For our timeliness, additional time on any topic may be limited to ensure all scheduled topics are covered during the allotted time for any given workshop. Similarly, previously covered topics may not be readdressed at subsequent workshops unless determined necessary. Finally, a reminder to all attendees, if you plan to make a comment or ask a question, please clearly state your name and your organization's name. You may raise your hand or add a comment at any point during our presentation, and we will ensure that all comments are addressed in the order they are received. So moving on to the next slide. In our previous workshops from September 2021 to January 2022, we covered, and on to the next slide, lessons learned from the previous 2 program cycles, an overview of proposed technical changes to draft guidelines, funding restrictions, changes to the Land Use Efficiency Evaluation Criterion, and California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, and the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, requirements. We also discussed programming 2 years of funding for cycle 3, which would cover fiscal years 2023 to 24, to 2024-25 with a $500 million funding capacity. In the next 3 slides, I will cover proposals where we reached a consensus during our previous workshops. All proposed changes have been incorporated into the red line draft of the 2022 SCCP guidelines, which are attached in the handouts tab and also can be found on our website. On the next slide. So Commission staff worked with the California Department of Housing and Community Development to develop the proposed changes to the guidelines, which integrate pro-housing policies into the efficient land use criterion, enabling applicants to access a broader range of options to help satisfy this requirement. Specifically, applicants can demonstrate that a proposed project will support and advance transportation efficient land use by either identifying local government jurisdictions that will be served by the proposed project and have obtained or applied for pro-housing designation from the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or they may also satisfy the requirement by identifying established or developing local land use policies in the project area which support efficient land use patterns and or incorporate pro-housing criteria identified in the updated land use efficiency and pro-housing supplement. Next slide, please. The land use efficiency and pro-housing supplement is a resource document developed to assist applicants to prepare their project nominations. The main changes to the supplement include the incorporation of specific pro-housing policies and assistance as an option to meet the efficient land use evaluation criterion. Minor updates to the type of narrative that can be provided if applicants choose to utilize land use indicators previously identified in the 2020 SCCP Land Use Efficiency Supplement, and updates to other available resources, including additional available grants. And finally, in the next slide, we discuss potential changes to environmental clearance requirements under Section 7, on page 3 of the 2020 SCCP guidelines. Specifically, the potential change would have required that CEQA and NEPA clearance be completed before program adoption. Based on the feedback we received on this proposal, we proposed a minor adjustment to this requirement for the 2022 program. As demonstrated on this slide and in the draft 2022 SCCP guidelines, we have extracted the environmental process requirements from funding restrictions to create a new dedicated section, Section 11, with clarifying language which specifies that both CEQA and NEPA clearance must be completed within 6 months of program adoption. At this time, this concludes the recap of the last workshops, which took place in September, October, November 2021, and January 2022, respectively. As you may recall, the December 2021 workshop was repurposed into an all SB1 competitive programs workshop to incorporate transportation equity, and the February 2022 workshop was repurposed into a 2-hour open office hour session with our stakeholders. At this time, I'm just going to go ahead and pause and see if there are any questions or comments from anybody.
Hi, Naveen. No hands raised and no written questions at the moment.
All righty. So moving on to agenda review, which is on the next slide, please. Thank you. In today's workshop, we will focus on the Performance Metrics Guidebook, review the red line changes to the draft 2022 SCCP guidelines, and discuss new information areas we will address further in the April workshop. Lastly, we will address office hours, upcoming workshops, and key topics for subsequent workshops. In the navigational bar on the right in GoToWebinar, reference documents are included as handouts for your convenience, and you can also find these on the workshop webpage on the Commission's website. Reference documents include the workshop agenda, the 2022 SCCP guidelines, the Performance Metrics Guidebook, and the draft 2022 SCCP guidelines, which are redlined edits. Again, I'm going to pause for any questions or comments before I move on.
Hi, Naveen. No questions or comments at the time.
Okay, thanks, Kayla. So moving on to the first item on the agenda. At this time, I would like to welcome Associate Deputy Director Hannah Walter to present the Performance Metrics Guidebook. Hannah, take it away.
Hi all, Hannah Walter. I manage the Trade Quarter Enhancement Program, but I also led the development of the Performance Metrics Guidebook with a lot of help from Caltrans and you all on developing the actual metrics. So thanks for letting me take some time to walk through it today. Next slide, please. So the development what the guidebook is really is just a set of instructions for how to calculate the required performance metrics. And this was a group effort. Like I just said, we had 14 meetings over 7 months. There were about 45 experts on the work group, and we addressed a metric one at a time, and we addressed all the metrics one at a time, and we talked about them in the work group. And then we also had just a lot of input from different people who would email different ideas, and so it was a collaborative effort. Next slide, please. So the purpose is to help provide guidance and provide resources for a metric. If we couldn't find where to get information for something, then we didn't require it. We want to provide consistency where possible. And I want to point out that even though this guidebook is here, it's up to the applicants to decide how you want to calculate each metric. There are some general guidance like that you need to follow, like we're looking for year 1 or year 20, or is this a daily number or an annual number? So you need to take that into account. But in terms of how you want to calculate it, it's actually up to you. This is just meant to be a tool to help you. Next slide, please. Just one quick note on the difference between evaluation criteria and metrics. The projects are scored based on evaluation criteria that's in the guidelines, but so the performance metrics is like a subset of evaluation criteria, but it's not exactly the same thing. There are some evaluation criteria that are not metrics. Okay, next slide, please. So here's a list of all the metrics, and it looks like the ones that are relevant to the Solutions for Congested Corridors program are highlighted in yellow, and we'll go over them. Next slide. This is a table at the beginning of the guidebook that I think is helpful. It lists out all the metrics on the left, and then it shows the programs that they're required for and the project types that they're required for. So if before you start, like if you're going to use the guidebook, then before you just go to start looking at how to do one, I would double check if it's on this list, because you want to make sure that it's required for your type of project and program. Next slide. This is a look at all the general guidance we provided for all the metrics. It shows whether the metric is average, annual, or daily, whether we're looking for year 20 or the most current year available. And on some of them, we're not requiring no build, and change. We're just requiring like 1 or 2 of those. So we also noted that there. Next slide. This is a look at the backup form that's required this year for each metric. So if the person reviewing your application doesn't understand what your metric really means, like if they just look at the numbers but it doesn't make sense to them, then probably what they're going to do is just look to see really quick if you provided any backup. And so when we tried to do that last year, it was a little hard because it was kind of hard sometimes to tell like where people put it, and it wasn't always, we didn't have enough guidance for you all about how we wanted to see that information. So this is our attempt to be a little more clear about what would help us to understand and what we like to see for each metric. So this form will be required for each metric just to provide basic backup information. It does not have to be in detail. If it's more than a page long, it's probably too long. But this is just where you provide like the base info about how you calculated your metrics. Next slide. Okay, so this is a look at the metrics that apply to all of the programs. And so that's air quality, the benefit cost ratio, safety, and the jobs created. So we'll go over those. Oh yeah, just a note about the Caltrans BC, the Cal BC model, the sketch model. A lot of the calculations that we propose in the guidebook are based on the sketch model. One of the reasons is because our understanding is that a lot of the local agencies and applicants that we typically get applications from are generally familiar with this model. The guidebook includes instructions about how to fill out the inputs that you need. The way that the model works is that there's a couple tabs at the beginning where you put in information about your project, and then based on that information, it does a whole series of calculations for you, many of which you can actually use to calculate the metrics. So we use that a lot in the guidebook, and I just want to make a quick note and say that if you're having problems filling out the inputs tab, even though the instructions are in the guidebook, they're really long. If you have any questions, I would reach out to the Caltrans Economics branch staff, but their email is in the guidebook, I believe. I will double check, but it's also on their website. On the same, their website is linked to the link to their website is in the guidebook. And the contact email for if you have questions is also on their website. So just a note that we use this model heavily in our guidebook, and the first two tabs are really the only ones you have to fill out, and then you just pull your answers from the rest of the tabs. Okay, next slide, please. Oh yeah, this is my disclaimer that these are really, then when I go over these for this meeting, they're just examples. They're not it's not the same exact thing you'll see in the guidebook, but that's too much information, so I tried to sum it up. Next slide, please. Okay, so air quality. Basically, this is looking at CO, CO2, NOx, PM 2.5 and 10, SOx and VOC. And so you can pull these from the emissions tab in the CalBC model. And what the model does is it takes the VMT for your project and it monetizes, well, it does monetize the benefits of saving emissions, but it also estimates the tons of emissions that will be saved on an annual basis. So that's what you can pull from the emissions tab in that model, and that's what the CalBC and that's what the guidebook is recommending that you do. So I included one of the snapshots there. Actually, most of it I think you can get from the next slide, but the reason that the guidebook also points to this specific piece of the emissions tab that I have pasted here with the red boxes, because the final results tab in the model groups PM10 and PM 2.5 together, but you have to separate them out for the performance metrics form, so it shows you where to go to get that. Okay, next slide, please. So the rest of them can all be pulled from here, which is the results tab in the CalBC model. So this info will be automatically generated for you once you fill in your inputs tab. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so same thing with the cost benefit ratio. So this is looking at total user benefits, vehicle operating cost savings, accident reductions, and vehicle emission reductions. And what it does is it just adds up the total the monetary total benefits of the project and the total cost of the project, and then it divides the two. If you want to use your own calculation because maybe you want to add something into the benefits portion of your equation that isn't in the CalBC model, isn't captured by the model, then what I would recommend that you do is you can do that and you can still pull in the bottom line numbers from the CalBC model, but then you can just add in your own additional benefits that you want to add in. And you're allowed to do that. So that's what I would recommend if you need to add things to the cost or the benefit side of your equation. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so for safety, and after this one and the jobs one, which is really quick, I'll stop and let you guys ask any questions you have. So there's technically 4 safety performance metrics that all fall under the category of safety. The first two are the number of fatalities and serious injuries. And so for this metric and all of the metrics, what the performance metrics form does is it asks you to provide the information in the no build scenario so in other words, if you don't do the project, in the build scenario, so if you do the project, and then the change between those two, because that will show you the impact the project is going to have. So for the first one, number of fatalities and number of serious injuries, all you're really doing is you're getting the 5 most current years of data that you can find. So this is one of the ones where we're just saying use the 5 most current years available. And then you're dividing it by 5 just to get an average. So that's fairly simple. The hardest part is actually getting the information itself. And so we've got 2 ideas for that in the guidebook. The first one is to use the crash data from Caltrans. They maintain that information. So if it's a Caltrans nominated project, then all you need to do is reach out to the Caltrans staff that you're working with and ask them to get that information for you. If your project is not a joint project with Caltrans, then you need to submit a Public Records Act request to request that information. The staff have assured me that even though that step has to be done, they should be able to get you that information fairly quickly. And so those are for projects on the state highway system. If your project is on a local street or road, the information becomes a lot more limited. The other resource that we found was the California Highway Patrol statewide integrated traffic record system. So that system actually also has information it has the information on local streets and roads. However, you have to apply to get access to that database, and you can get access, but sometimes it can be, you might have to reach out for help because you might have to register as a new user, and it takes some time. It's not like an inordinate amount of time, but it is a little bit time consuming to register for that database. But so those are the sources in the guidebook for the number of fatalities and the number of serious injuries. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, then there's also the rate of fatalities and serious injuries. Okay, so in order to do this one, for the no build, what you have to do is you have to find, there's these things called rate groups. They're in Caltrans's traffic collision data. That's not the same thing as the document that you need for the number of fatalities and serious injuries. By the way, this is a different data set, so you don't have to do a PRA to get this. It's just, this one is posted online. There's a link in the guidebook, but basically this is right now the most current version of this data. But what you need to do is you go into that data set, and based on certain characteristics of your project, like the AAD the average daily traffic or average annual daily traffic, the facility type, things like that, the highway type, and whether it's a rural or urban area, you basically look at those columns, and there's like a legend that can also help explain those columns if you don't know what they're talking about. But you look at those columns, you figure out which one is most applicable to your project, and then based on that, you'll be able to see what rate group you're in. And so like in this example, the project is in rate group H01, that's on the left hand side of that table, PDF looking table. And the base rate is 0.78. So I'm not going to go through every step because this is a little bit meticulous, but basically you check that rate against the AADT for your project to make sure it's reasonable. And then once you know that it is, you can put that in there as your base rate. But so that's how you do that one. It gets more interesting. This is what I was kind of excited about for the guidebook. So we did find a couple of resources to help you project the impact that your project will have on the safety. So like the impact that the safety features of your project might have on safety. We found a couple of resources that could help give you ideas about that. So that's in the next slide, I think. So Caltrans has these collision reduction factors for highway safety projects, and they're in the State Highway Safety Improvement Program guidelines. And so I pasted an example for you there, but this is basically what they're saying are some of what they believe are the rate reductions to collisions based on different safety features of your project. So when you do the no build for the rate, you can just rely on that data set we were just looking at in the previous slide. When you do the build, you want to take that rate, but then you want to factor in, okay, well, what impact is my project going to have on this rate? You have to figure that out for yourself. So you can use this kind of information, which is in the guidebook, to help you get kind of like a basic understanding of, okay, well, if I know that my project does signalization, for example, then it may reduce my rate by up to 15% or 35%. So it's just an idea to help you estimate the impact that the safety features of your project might have. And there's actually more examples than just this little piece that I pasted here. So you can read about those in the guidebook. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so before we go on to I think I may have not have put in a slide about the jobs created metric, but that one is really easy. We figured out we used a federal formula for determining how many jobs, both indirect and direct, that a project would create. And basically it equaled a percent, like 0.000013% of a job is created for every dollar that you spend. So you just have to multiply your total project cost by that decimal, and then you'll get the number of jobs created. Okay, so before we move on to the SCCP specific metrics, does anyone have any questions on the metrics that I just covered?
Hi, Hannah. I'm not seeing any hands raised quite yet, and we don't have any written questions.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. This is a lot of information. I hope it's helpful. And feel free to reach out to me with any questions too. Okay, so yeah. Okay, person hours of travel time saved. What this tab is really doing, or this metric is really doing, is it's estimating how much time is going to be saved per person, like as opposed to say per vehicle. And so the CalBC model actually calculates this number specifically. And so I recommend that you just use that number and pull it from the travel time savings tab. And because of the fact that this metric is focusing on specifically the amount of time saved, you're only required to fill out the change column, but you can fill out the no build and build if you like. We actually, so it's difficult to pull out all the steps and how this is calculated just by looking at the model, but we did kind of do that, and it's actually in an appendix to the guidebook if you want to kind of dive a little more into how exactly this number is being calculated. If you want to understand that more, that is in the guidebook. But it's automatically calculated for you. And if you were doing it on your own because for some reason you didn't want to use the CalBC model, then what you would need to do is try to figure out how much time people spend going through your project segment on average, and then contrast that to how much time they will spend once your project is built. but you'd need to do that per person, not per vehicle. Sometimes if people don't have, sometimes the way people do that is by figuring that out for the vehicles. And then once they've done that, they multiply it by a certain like number. They're assuming maybe like 1.5 persons in every car or something. So that's one way you could do it if you don't want to use the model. Okay, next slide. So travel time reliability. This is one where I feel like the guidebook was able to be extremely helpful to applicants. The first thing I want to point out is for this cycle 3, only the no build scenario is required. This is because when we were discussing it in the work group, there was a lot of questions about the best way to calculate the build scenario, because when you're trying to look at reliability, you're trying to look at the impact of unplanned random events. So that's really hard to estimate. And so we will work with Caltrans on trying to figure out a good way to estimate future the impact of a project on reliability. But until we figure that out in a way that's doable for everyone, we're just going to require the no build reliability. So for no build, I'm not even going to go into how you would calculate this on your own because it's kind of complicated and it involves traffic every 15 minutes. But for the guidebook, there's actually a crosswalk that we created that shows you by highway segment what the travel times are. So you can pick the best travel time for your highway segment and put it into the no build scenario. The travel times are broken up by time of day. So in the example that I have pasted here, you can find your road segment by the road name and by the latitude and longitude or the post mile. And then once you found that, the travel time reliability, that's that box on the bottom of the slide, is broken up by 4 different time periods. And so you can pick the number that you'd like to use for the no build scenario. Just keep in mind that everything above 1.5 is considered reliable. Everything below 1.5 is considered unreliable. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is also an interesting one that we had the opportunity to collaborate with some staff at Caltrans on. So this one, level of transit delay, it's measuring how often buses are on time if there's a bus, like a transit stop within your project segment, in your project location. And it's only required if the transit agencies in your project area are registered on this. It's called a GTFS, but it stands for General Transit Feed Specification Real Time. So there's a list that Caltrans has been working with transit agencies on, and basically what they're doing is working with them to get like GPS location tracking in their buses, yes. And so what you need to do for this one is you need to first identify your project area. Then you need to go to this list, which is linked in the guidebook, and see if there are any transit agencies in your project area. If there aren't, then this metric isn't required. If there are, then go to this list that's linked in your guidebook and look it up. And then if it's on this list, it's required. If it's not on this list, again, it's not required. So in order to be required, you have to actually have a transit agency in your project area that's operating like a stop there, and it has to be on this list. If both of those requirements aren't met, then you don't have to fill this out. If it is on this list, then basically what you do is you fill out a map that shows the location of your project, and there's a link to that online. And then you send it to Caltrans, and the Caltrans contact is also in the guidebook, and then they'll pull the number for like the level of on-time service for that agency, and they'll send it to you. So that is that metric. Okay, then we get to VMT. Before we get to VMT, is there any questions on the last few that I just covered?
Hi, Hannah. We do have a couple of just written questions right now. So the first one, I guess just to confirm for the good of the group regarding the jobs created metric, is the formula for that in the performance guidebook that's on the website?
Yes.
Okay. And then our second one, Daniel Kapolsky asked, safety focused on highways, are there metrics for other modes?
No, not right now. Not because we don't think that it's important, but because for some of the things like rail isn't, for example, change in rail throughput isn't a requirement for solutions. It's a requirement for trade corridors, but we really couldn't find a good source data. So in order for a source data to be feasible, it needed to be accessible by like 99% of the people who are applying for our programs, or 100 if possible. We needed pretty much everyone to be able to access this data set. We needed it to be usable, and we needed it to be applicable to a fair amount of, project types. For some of the transportation modes like rail, and to a certain extent transit, we really had a hard time finding usable source information. So that's one reason why for now, the safety metric is only focused on highways. If anyone has any ideas for where we would get good source data for safety metrics in other places, then let me know. For some, I know that when I was researching the best way to do level of transit delay, what I ran across as a real problem was that every transit agency does have statistics that they report, and I forget how often, I think it's like monthly, but the problem is that all of them are a little bit different. They report it a little bit different, and it's not always easy to find. So like there are hundreds of transit agencies in the state. I was trying to find an easy way to like link their statistics websites to the guidebook so that I could offer it as a piece of source information, and I couldn't do it. For one thing, for a lot of the agencies, I couldn't find that information. And for another thing, it was so different that it almost would require, it would require some work to even, there was just no consistency to get like a consistent answer that was easily accessible. So because of that, we just decided to stick with, that's why we went with working with one of the reasons that we worked with Caltrans on the level of transit delay metric. And that's also why you're seeing just the focus on the highways for the safety metrics. But we're open to, improving that in future years if we can find usable source information.
Thanks, Hannah. We did receive one more question. This is from Catherine Studwell. We are considering a transit project. We are the transit agency. How do these metrics relate to transit projects if the purpose of the project is to improve reliability and reduce travel time?
Yeah, that's a good question, because what you're trying to show is how your project is going to increase like reliability and travel time. So if you're going to report, for most of these, you're going to report 3 numbers. You're going to show without the project, with the project, and the change. The only thing is for the person hours of travel time saved, all we're saying, and there is transit options for travel time savings in the CalBC model, so you should be able to use that for your project. But all we're saying for the person hours of travel time saved is, look, since this the model automatically calculates the savings, you don't have to go through the bother of showing the no build and the build. Just show the change, because the change is the same thing as the savings, assuming that there are savings. So that's why only the change is required for that metric. You can provide all three pieces of information if you like, but that would show the benefit of your project on person hours. Then for reliability, you may provide the with project number. Like you can provide the build number for reliability if you want to. If you want to try to measure the improvement in reliability that your project will create, then you can do that. It's just that we didn't have like a standardized methodology for improving, showing how to improve reliability. So we didn't want to require people to provide that, but you still are able to do that. And then, yeah, so I think that answers your question, because all the other ones, you're showing the no build, build, and change. So you're showing the improvement your project would make.
Thanks, Hannah. There's no hands raised or additional questions at the moment.
Okay. Okay, so VMT. So the first thing I want to say is that the guidebook is, you are allowed to calculate change in daily VMT however you want. The only thing is that if your project is on the state highway system, then you have to show that Caltrans is okay with the methodology that you used. And there's a form that you're gonna use to fill that out. Well, if you're familiar with the application process, there's a, it's like a highway assessment form or something, I forget what it's called, but it's usually incorporated into our guidelines as an attachment. It's like one of the appendixes. So I think what we're gonna do is modify that form to show that you've gotten Caltrans's approval for your estimate of daily change in VMT. So for the state highway system, you do have to get Caltrans's approval. But in general, how you calculate VMT is up to you. This was just meant as help. Okay. So this is the first method, using the CalBC model. One thing you could do is you could take the project length, which is in one of the beginning tabs of the model, and you could basically just, and also use the volume, and then just multiply the two. So that's a very easy, way to do it. That's one option. Then you can also use the Caltrans AADT reports. So those are online, and there's a link in the guidebook. They look like the page I pasted below, and it has the post miles on the left and the description of the segment. And then you can see in column J in this example, it shows the AADT total. So if you wanted, you can use this report, and you can use that number for the no build, and then estimate the number under the build. The only thing is that if you are going to do this, there's a weighted AADT average that they want you to use, and it's fine. It's not hard to do, and the formula is in the guidebook, but I'm not going to try to recite it from memory right here. It's just part of the getting to the AADT no build number. Okay, so then the other example, and this is mainly for, so the first two ways that I just went over, you might want to use those if you're a smaller agency, if you don't have many staff, if there's one person that's responsible to write the whole thing, do all the metrics, and you don't have necessarily as many resources at your disposal. If that's you, then I would recommend using one of the first two options that I just covered, because those are fairly simple. This next one is an example, but it's based on a larger region from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, and it's based on the process they go through with their travel demand model. So they basically do a model run with some built-in assumptions, and they run a base year with existing conditions, and then ultimately what they do is they select projects that are most likely to be implemented, and then they do another model run as a build scenario. And they do average VMT per person, I believe. And then they put that together for the daily VMT, the change in daily VMT for the metric. So that's actually a good example to follow if you have a travel demand model that you can use. Okay, then, this is just another note on 743. Most of you are familiar probably with the 743. For the SQL process, the lead agency has the discretion for how to calculate VMT. And if you want to, so one of the ways in the guidebook that you can calculate this metric for the guidebook is also that you can follow Caltrans's SB 743 guidance. And so what that means is that you either need to use a Caltrans approved travel demand model or the NCST calculator. Yeah. So the Caltrans approved travel demand model, there's and this is in the guidebook, but in one of their guidance documents, there's a checklist that you can use to see whether or not your travel demand model would be approved by Caltrans. You ultimately have to get their approval for that. And that guidance is linked in the guidebook if you want to follow the SB 743 guidance. Then if you don't have a travel demand model, there's also an online calculator that they recommend using, but the calculator does have some limitations, so I just wanted to go over those. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's some areas where that calculator can't be used because it's really easy. Like if you go online, and this is in the guidebook, you really only have to like plug in 1 or 2 numbers, and then it will tell you the results. So it's a really easy to use tool, but there's some limitations on it, and I just wanted to be clear about those. So in 14 of the MSA counties, it can't be used for Class 1 facilities. There are 21 counties where you can't use the calculator. And then most project types, you can't use the calculator unless you're adding an HOV or a general purpose lane. So just be aware of those limitations. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, that's the end. Okay, so those are the metrics that are applicable to the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. So any questions on the daily change in VMT metric?
Hi, Hannah. We don't have any written questions at the moment, and I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks for your time, everyone. That's all I have.
Thank you, Hannah. Okay, so moving on to the next item on our agenda, please open up the draft 2022 SCCP guidelines that are linked as a reference document for today's workshop. I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to do that, or a couple of seconds, not minutes. Sorry, that would take forever. Okay, and I'm going to pop mine open too. So while I will not run through the entire document line by line, I did want to draw your attention to note that all proposed changes are denoted in red ink and bolded, and all deleted language is struck out in red ink. In addition to the proposed changes I addressed during the recap I provided at the start of this workshop, we have made several non-substantive changes to the draft 2022 SCCP guidelines. Kayla, if we could go to the next slide. These changes include clarifying existing language, adding additional examples or context, and reordering or reorganizing sections. One minor addition that we are proposing in today's workshop is to include project prioritization language under project rating process in section 16 on page 10. This language will stipulate that the Commission will prioritize projects that are jointly nominated, construction ready, advance the state's climate goals, employ innovative and/or multimodal solutions, and leverage funding from private, federal, state, local, and/or regional sources that are discretionary funds. This falls in line with some of our previous discussions about the overall evaluation of projects and reiterates existing language embedded in the framework of the 2020 SCCP guidelines as well. The consideration of the advancement of the state's climate goals is the only added value for project prioritization, which is not explicitly enumerated in the SCCP statute. And it is included for consistency as we are incorporating CAPTI strategies into the 2022 program guidelines. Another update that I want to bring up and highlight is that we are renaming primary evaluation criteria to congestion evaluation criteria, and renaming and combining secondary evaluation criteria and deliverability evaluation criteria, and again, renaming and combining that into additional evaluation criteria. We believe this minor adjustment of the evaluation criteria better suits the significance of each criterion during the evaluation process. We will also reiterate that congestion evaluation criteria, again, which was previously primary evaluation criteria, is still the focal point of consideration when projects are evaluated because it represents the program's primary objective to fund effective solutions to congested corridors throughout the state. We do hope that these adjustments will make the guidelines easier to follow and understand. If you have any suggestions for additional changes, feel free to raise your hand, add a comment in the comment box, or contact us after the workshop to share your feedback. At this time, Kayla, do we have any questions or comments?
Hi, Naveen. No hands raised. We do have a question that I'll share just for the good of the group, asking, will we need to report, it's going back to performance metrics, excuse me, will we need to report these in the EPPR again? And the answer is yes.
Thanks, Kayla.
And that's it for now.
Any other questions people might have about the draft 2022 SCCP guidelines? Any comments, or if you want to put one in the comment box, that's fine too. But if you think about anything later, again, you can always email your feedback to us and we'll definitely respond as soon as we get it. I do see a raised hand, Kayla.
Thanks, Naveen. Go ahead, Celeste.
Thank you. Marina Espinoza, you are unmuted.
Hi, Marina Espinoza with the California State Association of Counties. Just want to say that we appreciate the way the pro-housing language is incorporated into the proposed changes to the guidelines. They appear to give counties enough flexibility to be able to benefit from achieving the designation or working toward it without making it a requirement. The proposed changes address the concerns that CSAC had expressed in previous workshops related to the pro-housing designation language. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing, Marina.
All right, I'm not seeing any more hands.
Okay, thanks, Celeste. I will go ahead and move on to the next slide then, which is slide 42, new information areas. Thank you, Kayla. New information areas will be added in the draft 2022 SCCP guidelines. Some of these information areas may be incorporated into existing additional evaluation criteria, such as accessibility or economic development and job creation and retention. They may be added in as new additional evaluation criteria, such as equity or community engagement, and or serve as optional additional information about emerging areas in transportation planning and delivery, such as climate resilience and adaptation. While the latter would not be considered evaluated criteria, they may be considered in the overall review of the project. We will discuss these new information areas during the April 13th SCCP workshop. So moving on to the next slide. So we do hope you will join us on Friday, April 8th from 1 to 4 p.m. for the SB1 Competitive Programs Workshop, which will serve as a follow-up to the December 2021 workshop on incorporating transportation equity. The official save the date flyer for this workshop is linked here, but it's also available online on the Commission's website. We also invite you to save the date for the final 2022 SCCP workshop, which is again scheduled to take place on Wednesday, April 13th from 1 to 4 p.m. Again, please remember to place holds on your calendars for both workshops. We'll be going through a lot of information, I believe, in both of them, so they'll be pretty important. And I will pause again to see if anybody has any questions or if there are any raised hands.
Hi, Naveen. Not seeing any raised hands or questions at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Kayla. So then I think, oh wait, I think someone just came in.
Yes. So this is from Augustin Barajas. Will the lack of pro-housing designation or application at the time of consideration reduce number of points that an application receives?
Thanks for that comment, Augustin. I will again reiterate and remind folks that we do not have a point system for the SCCP project nominations. We rate them on a rating scale from high to high, medium, 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 low, and low. So with that said, no, we do not believe, I do not believe that it will impact the rating you receive, because again, all projects are evaluated holistically, but primarily on the congestion evaluation criteria and the additional evaluation criteria. So all of that will add up together. It won't be just like one item that determines the worth of your project. Great, thanks, Augustin. Thanks for asking that question. Any other questions coming up or any hands raised?
Hi, Naveen. We do have one more. Looks like a comment or question from Catherine Steadwell. The final workshop is the day before local agencies' deadline for submitting their US DOT RAISE grant applications. This could affect attendance at the workshop.
Okay, thanks for sharing that with us, Catherine. We'll reconvene internally and see if there's anything we can do about that workshop in particular. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Not seeing any more hands raised or written questions at the moment, Naveen.
Hey,
Okay.
sorry. This is Matthew. I hope you can hear me. I'm gonna butt in really quick. I think Catherine's point is an important one. Maybe if Catherine, if you can confirm, is that date following the day of the, I'm gonna guess it's the Thursday, April 13th workshop. I don't expect that federal deadline would be on a Saturday, April 9th, but we'll absolutely consider changing that workshop date if it's identified that we'll have low participation, because we know that our last workshop will be probably bringing some of our last major items to you all.
Matthew, Catherine did respond and said that 4/14 is the due date for the RAISE grant applications.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, we will take a hard look at that. We appreciate you raising that to our attention.
Okay, seeing no other comments or raised hands, I think we can move on to the next slide. So a reminder here that we are scheduling appointments through the end of April with agencies that would like to consult one-on-one with Commission staff. These private sessions will allow agencies to ask us questions about the application process and program guidelines as they apply to their projects. All appointments will be scheduled on a first-come, first-served basis. To request an appointment, follow the link provided here to an online form. After you have completed and submitted the form, Commission staff will review your request and contact you to get your appointment scheduled. This information has been emailed to all of our stakeholders, and we have also posted it on the Commission's website and on the SCCP webpage as well. Again, I will pause for questions and comments in case anybody has any questions about that or anything else we've discussed so far. Feel free to chime in.
Hi, Naveen. Not seeing any raised hands or questions at the moment.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Thank you. So in the upcoming 2022 workshops, we do plan to discuss the integration of equity, project nominations, timely use of funds, new information areas, and any additional topics that may come up for consideration. With guideline development workshops at an end, we want to ensure stakeholder comments and suggestions are addressed before draft guidelines development wraps up. We encourage you to share suggestions at the April 13th SCCP workshop, or I guess at this juncture, we're going to be reevaluating the date of that particular workshop and let you know if there are going to be any changes. And you can also email us any of your suggestions or comments or questions to us in advance so that we may make sure that all of your feedback is considered promptly and timely. We do reserve the ability to schedule a final workshop in May if it is absolutely necessary, due to the number of issues maybe that are brought up last minute or something like that. So again, I'll pause for any questions or comments that folks may have right now.
Hi, Naveen. We do have one hand raised. I'll turn it to Celeste now.
Thanks, Kayla. Zoe Unruh, you are unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Thank you for this and the draft red line guidelines to look through. Very helpful. I did just have a question. I know some of the edits you indicated are for formatting and clarification, but I wondered what was the commission's or commission staff thinking with regard to the change in language around the comprehensive multimodal corridor plans. I think it was a minor tweak that corridor plans are to be prepared by following the CMCP guidelines, where it was previously written in accordance. Is that just kind of for clear language, or is there a finer point maybe I'm missing in that edit?
Yeah, it was just to clarify the language a little bit. As we were reading it, it kind of seemed a little bit vague in what we meant by in accordance with. People do understand that in accordance with means like the stipulated information in the particular guideline or statute that is being referenced thereafter, but sometimes it's easier to just say by following. So it's not really a major change of any kind, it's just semantics. So if people feel strongly about it, we absolutely can revert it back to in accordance with, I think.
And thanks, Naveen. I agree with what you said. And Zoe, I think I understand where you're going with that, because you might it to mean by following the guidelines means that plans have to have been developed following the adoption of the guidelines, so following the guidelines lead, and we're not stipulating that. I think the previous language that said that the CMCPs could be completed in accordance with the CMCPs, as Naveen mentioned, is what we're still going for. But if you think that language is a bit concerning, we're not saying that in sequence of events that the CMCP has to be developed following the creation of the CMCP guidelines, or directly going through the CMCP guidelines to the creation of the CMCP. I'm probably making it more confusing now, but I think I understand what your concern is, and that's certainly not what we're trying to say. Is what I'm getting at.
Thank you. I think that clears it up. There's a lot of flexibility in those guidelines. And I guess I'm just trying to make sure that doesn't confuse the direction offered by the guidelines. Is not intended to be entirely prescriptive, follow each of these steps. And so I think that's where I was just trying to sort out. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the reason why I changed, I think, to by following was because the flexibility that you're talking about, Zoe. So it seemed in accordance with was stricter, but I think it's up to interpretation. But again, like Matthew said, if folks feel strongly about it, we can absolutely revert it back. It's not set in stone or anything like that. Any other comments or raised hands? Feel free to pipe up if you have anything to add.
Hi, Naveen. I'm not seeing any hands raised or questions at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Kayla. So I think we can move on to the next slide. Again, to recap, today we reviewed and engaged in a robust discussion about the Performance Metrics Guidebook, the red line draft of the 2022 SCCP guidelines, and introduced new information areas which we will expand upon further in upcoming workshops. There are no resulting action items from this meeting except that we're going to continue evaluating and making changes and share the next version with you in the April workshop. And we will also post the workshop recording and this presentation on the Commission's website after the workshop. So be on the lookout. Next slide, please, Kayla. So for the latest Commission news and updates, you can visit our website and follow us on social media. If you have any general questions or comments, you can always email us at ctc@catc.ca.gov. Again, this is the last call for any questions or comments before I move on to contact information and closing out the webinar. So if anybody has anything to add right now that you'd like everybody to hear or read out loud from a comment, let us know. Matthew, you have something to say.
Yeah, I would have something quick to add, and I have the luxury of just turning my camera on and talking whenever I want. So the one thing I want to say, and I think Naveen has done an excellent job underscoring, is that we wanted to make available the redlined draft 2022 Congested Corridors Guidelines for all of you to hopefully dig into that document over the next month before our next workshop, and to come prepared with any tweaks or suggestions you might have on what we've already discussed, as well as what we plan to discuss at the April workshop. Now, the reason that we don't have a May workshop planned is to give us some time to work on any of the feedback we receive at the April workshop to incorporate into our final draft guidelines for the June CTC meeting. So that's why we encourage you to comb through what we've shared, and you please feel free to follow up with us in writing if you do have like suggestions, such as Zoe's comment on the minor language change on CMCPs. Like, that's very good information for us to consider. But just understand that what you have in your hands for the draft guidelines right now are all changes that we've already addressed in our previous workshops. So hopefully that the edits and the proposals don't seem unfamiliar if you've been following along with the guidelines development so far. But the reason I wanted to give this last plug is because we're also going to do something similar with the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program and the Local Partnership Program, both competitive and formula. And we plan to share redlined kind of in time and point in time edits for those program guidelines either by the end of this week. I know we have a commission meeting next week, so hopefully by the end of this week to also give you some time to perform a similar review if you're interested in those two programs as well. So I know this was a commitment we made, I think, back in January, so just kind of closing the loop with all of you on that. So again, Naveen, sorry to jump in. I just really wanted to emphasize that we are nearing the end of our guidelines development process, and I do encourage, if any stakeholders have any feedback that they would like to make us aware of, now is the time to start making those suggestions or concerns or questions raised. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew, for chiming in. And that was good information and a good reminder and recall of the conversation we had a little bit earlier in the workshop too. So again, last call for any questions or comments. Kayla, Celeste, do you guys see anything? I don't see anything on my end.
Hi, Naveen, also saying nothing.
Okay, well then moving on to the next slide. For specific inquiries regarding this program or SB1 programming in general, you may contact us individually using the information provided here. We will always do our best to respond as soon as we can and as best as we can to any inquiries, suggestions, or comments that we do receive. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We, as always, appreciate the constructive and informative discussion and feedback. We do hope that you will review those draft red line edits that are, again, point in time for the March workshop, and offer us any feedback, even if it is just to say like, hey, nothing seems crazy in here. That it would just be great to hear from you. So we look forward to seeing you all at the next workshop. Hope you have an excellent afternoon and a great week ahead, and see you in April.